Well, hello and welcome to the latest edition of Sport Chat with me, Jon Francis. Joining us this morning to talk about the big issues of the day, we've got Richard Shaw-Wright, broadcast journalist and from the 4020 podcast. Iain Hay also with us from the Scottish Rugby podcast. And we've got John Hindhaugh, motorsport commentator from Radio Show Limited. Hi to you all. You all well?
Not bad, thanks, morning.
Very well, thank you.
All good. Let's start then. We're going to obviously focus on rugby and motorsport as we progress, but we've got to start with the full return of the Premier League and whether it was a success or not. And let's start with you, Richard. First of all, what did you think of all the matches we've had over the last few days and how it's been received and how it went down?
Well, it's been a great reminder that generally football is actually rubbish, isn't it? And most of the games have been terrible. But that's football. We hype it up every week. It is the national sport. Everyone loves it. But unfortunately, maybe it is the lack of atmosphere, maybe the lack of crowds. There was something missing, wasn't there, from each and every game. I spent plenty of time on here a couple of weeks ago saying, "Oh, Sheffield United won't be affected by the break," and they've had an awful week thanks to the broken referees and obviously an awful performance against Newcastle on Sunday. Well done to the Magpies there for that win. But apart from that, we had great performance from Palace. The Merseyside derby was a damp squib, as these things tend to be.
Yeah.
City absolutely destroyed Arsenal, and Arsenal, less about the better about them at the moment, but football's back. It's the first signs of normality, but just something missing there.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it, Iain? I mean, you and John looking on your sports sort of yet to really get going again in the UK, certainly. Just looking on Iain, looking at the empty stadia and the games actually being played, I suppose it probably gives you encouragement for your sports moving forward, but like Richard said, maybe something slacking there a little.
Yeah, one of the main things about sport really is the fans. I remember saying when the Bundesliga restarted and they didn't have the fake noise piped in, and they actually noticed a lot less aggression towards referees from the players. So I think the referees are probably quite happy with it. But no, it does certainly. There's this kind of strange feeling. It's almost like being at an Edinburgh match in Murrayfield.
And what did you make of it, Johnny? Have you managed to catch some of the football in the last few days?
Well, I'm very much of the same opinion as Iain. I watched the Bundesliga when it came back, and I couldn't watch it. It looked like a practice game, and it was live sport, so I thought I'd give it a go. So I was looking forward really excitedly to the return of the Premiership. I'd watched a bit of Australian rules football actually in the previous week, which had that piped crowd noise in, and I did think it made a difference. That soundscape. I'm a radio guy, so actually the sound is as important as the visuals for me, and I thought it made a difference. But I watched a few matches in the first round of the Premiership back, and it's still not working for me. And I think there's a fundamental question that we've got to keep asking ourselves with all sport is, why are we back and why are we doing it, and is it worth it? And it's all about money. And my club's in Division 1. I'm a Sunderland supporter, and as soon as EFL got a sweet deal from the broadcasters, the 10 million that they would have to give back, they canned it. So it was all about the money and all about the refunds. And I think it's too early. I think it's wrong. I think they should have canned the season. I'm sorry if you're a Liverpool supporter, but they should have. Either they end the season as it is and they hand out the trophies, or they end the season and nothing happens. But if they do that, there shouldn't be any promotion or relegation. We should have just canned the season. And I really don't see the point. If we've got to do the kind of stuff that we saw at the weekend in football to get sport back, then you've got to ask yourself, are we not trying a bit too hard right now?
Yeah, you do feel for the fans, Richard, in this situation, don't you? You look just those little video walls behind the goals showing fans. It just that didn't work, did it? Either.
It's trying too hard, isn't it? I mean, I like the cardboard cutouts because they're just ridiculous, but the video walls, it's almost people trying too hard to replicate something that isn't there. I've been watching the games without the sound. I've taken the option. I don't think it's working on the football, and the rugby league in Australia, they've got the sound right, but rugby's a different sport in terms of the ebbs and flows of the matches, so it works there. on the football, it just doesn't sound right. So I've been watching without the crowd. It's just it sounds like you're at a training game. It sounds like you're at an FA Cup match where there's no one there, and it just doesn't sound right. But as has been said, it's all about the money, isn't it? And we're all aware of that. When there's no theatre, there's no concerts, there's nothing going on apart from sport, purely because of the financial need of the clubs to get things going again, and probably the broadcasters as well, because we've all taken the cut and we've all decided to save our 20-30 quid a month by not paying for the sport. Well, they want that money back as well now, and now sport's back, and we're all excited. Or we're supposed to be anyway.
I suppose, Richard, nothing changes fans moaning after a couple of games. Arsenal in particular, seems to be problems there already, don't there, with Aubameyang maybe wanting away, and the way they've lost those two, well, particularly at Brighton on at the weekend, already fans having a go at what's happening there. Nothing changes, I suppose, in that respect.
Can't blame anyone for wanting to leave, can you? And you almost think with the rise of the fan TV on social media, that almost defeats a better for them in terms of advertisers and views and clicks, because people want to see people having meltdowns over defeats at Brighton. But Arsenal have, Man United went how many? 26 years without a league title. Liverpool have gone similar. No team's got a divine right to be up there year in, year out. Chelsea weren't for years until they found some money. Man City obviously weren't. They were down in League One, weren't they? Or the equivalent not too long ago. So no one's got the divine right. Arsenal don't have that same financial backing as, say, a City at the moment. But they've done well in having a great facility. They'll be back again in the future. They're not going to drop down to League One, are they? They're always going to be somewhere in the middle of the Premier League. It's just a time for their supporters to realise that. Rebuild, get the right people in charge. Is Mikel Arteta the right man? Who knows? They've gone from a coach who won stuff in Europe, in Unai Emery, to a rookie coach. For a top Premier League club, and I know Chelsea have done the same and have got the same reservations there, that seems like an odd decision to make. But Arsenal fans have to realise that you can't win every year, especially when there are teams above you with massive financial advantages you don't have.
Yeah, I suppose like in rugby as well, a new coach comes in. It's going to take time, isn't it? In any job for someone to settle in. Someone like Mikel Arteta has a huge job on his hands, but there's, in terms of Premier League, maybe a little bit different to rugby. You don't get that time possibly to bed in.
No, especially in the Premiership, there's such riches on offer. Like you're saying there, Unai Emery had a good CV, but it just didn't work out for him. And obviously, once you go from the glory years of Arsene Wenger, and that's Invincibles team that was there in the early 2000s, everything's going to look worse in comparison. I think maybe with rugby you might get a little bit longer, just because they can't chop and change so readily available. They don't have the finance there readily available. So you might get a bit longer, but rugby fans are a fickle bunch as well. So if results aren't going well, there's calls for people's heads on pikes.
Yeah, and how does that reflect in motorsport, John, as well? The team principals and the drivers. How much time are they given?
Well, if you look at the Arsenal situation and compare it to, say, Manchester United, it's always difficult coming out of a period of consistency in management and then trying to find the same kind of balance. It happens in all sports. And if you look at what happened at Man U and who they went through, that none of those guys were bad managers necessarily. They've eventually got to Solskjaer, but is that even a long term? I think Arsenal are still in the transition period. They've got to sort themselves out. They didn't look up for it in both of the opening games. My missus is a Gooner, born and bred, and Arsenal were always the London club that I followed, and I think it's sad. It's like looking at Williams in Formula One, how a mighty club has fallen on hard times, not necessarily financially hard times, but just not getting the balance right. And whether that comes from the top, and I don't necessarily mean the manager, I mean beyond that and into the boardroom and into the corporate governance of the organisation as a football club or a Formula One team is now. Finance will always have something to do with it, particularly in the Premiership. But I think you've still got to, if you are an Arsenal fan or even a Man U fan, accept exactly what Richard said. Nobody's got the absolute right to be there and thereabouts. I understand for an Arsenal fan the consistency which they've had over the last few years when they've always got into Europe in some way, shape or form, and that's huge financially as well. But I think you've just got to give it time. I'm not sure Arteta's the right person. I'm not sure he's got the right people at the club. David Luiz needs to hang his head in shame after the first game. I could have made a better tackle than that. All right, I'm not very quick, but it's a long way to run round me. Nobody would have got round me at that point on the goal line. I mean, come on, guys. Really, it needs to be sorted out. They need to have more passion. But we go back to what we said in the first place, gentlemen, is that passion not there because they're not being wound up by the atmosphere of what they're playing? They're going to get paid their ridiculously large amounts of money, whether or not they win, whether or not they perform, and there's nothing to wind them up when they get out there. And I think if you look at other sports like, say, even like tennis, look at McEnroe or Ilie Nastase. They were at their best when they were complaining about something, when they wanted to have a go, when they were riled up, when there was emotion. Where was the emotion from Arsenal at the weekend? There wasn't any.
Yeah, I heard one fan say after the game at the weekend that Guendouzi grabbed Maupay by the throat. If only he'd have shown that passion during the game instead of after it. That was the consensus, really. Just before we get on to rugby and motorsport in a bit more detail, I just want to ask you about the bottom of the table, Richard. Aston Villa still in big trouble, losing at home to Chelsea. West Ham also looked really lacklustre, didn't they, against Wolves, particularly in the second half. Two big clubs there in desperate trouble. Norwich looked like they might have gone after losing to Southampton, and Bournemouth struggling as well. It's looking like 3 from 4 for me. I still think Watford might have enough to get out of it, and big wins at the weekend, obviously for Brighton, moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I should have mentioned Wolves as one of those teams who probably can outspend Arsenal at the moment as well, and do it in the right way, it seems, with the way they spend. Who goes? Villa, you think, having gone a goal up against Chelsea yesterday, everything's set up for them to go on and pick up the 3 points, but great Chelsea second half turnaround, and probably by those substitutions by Lampard. West Ham, you just wonder about West Ham, don't you? Because they make the decision to sack their manager and bring in a guy who's already failed there, and that just seems to make no sense whatsoever. Brighton seem to have some spirit in that win against Arsenal, but how much is it down to Arsenal? I don't know. Taking no credit away from Brighton. Bournemouth, I thought, were poor from what I saw against Palace. They're not as if they're the greatest team in football, are they, Palace? They just get the job done. And there's the value of having a manager like Hodgson who's been there, done that, and knows exactly how to work with the resources he has. And Norwich look like they're down, don't they? So it is. Would I want to pick who goes at the moment? The problem is, between Villa and West Ham, they can throw in a great performance somewhere, but it's have they got the time to do so? I want to sit on the fence, but I don't know.
And interesting, John, that they actually play each other on the final day of the season, West Ham.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be key. Whether that will be the decider, the TV companies will hope it will be. I just think there's, again, a slight lack of belief at West Ham. Sorry to all the Hammers fans, that they can get things done. They're still whinging about the move of Stadia. And again, it's that lack of consistency. It's that lack of direction that they've had, chopping and changing, and I just don't see the belief in themselves. They could turn in a couple of great performances. Villa are less up and down. Maybe they've just got a little bit more. Norwich, I think, sadly, because I've got a couple of very good good friends who are Norwich fans, I think they're gone. But I think Villa might just get through it. Watford, I don't know. I do think they've played some lovely Wolves. Sorry, I think they've played some lovely football, and I like their style. I like their spirit. Maybe that'll be enough for them.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. The Premier League is back, of course. Let's move on to other matters. And professional sport, Ian, in Scotland's been given the go-ahead to restart. Just give us the outline of what that means for Scottish Rugby. The Pro 14, Glasgow and Edinburgh are going to play each other, aren't they, a couple of times from August? Is that right? Just give us the picture for those that don't know about what's happening with rugby up there.
Yeah. Okay. So as of today, now that the Scottish Government have put us into phase 2 of the lockdown, the players have been invited to voluntary fitness sessions at Murrayfield, all the professional players, and with the view to two international derbies between Edinburgh and Glasgow on the 22nd of August. The Pro 14 season has been shortened, so what you're going to get is going to be the 2 derbies between Glasgow and Edinburgh. In Italy, it's going to be Zebra, Treviso, and South Africa, the Kingston Cheetahs. Ireland and Wales, as they have 4 representatives, they've still to be decided. So these scores, they'll be added to the final pool table. The playoff system has been shortened. It's usually quarterfinals and then the semis, final obviously, but now they're doing away with the quarters, so it's going to be the first 2 teams in the 2 conferences will play off against each other. For Glasgow, this means that we will probably not make the playoffs for the first time since, I think it's 2011 or something like that. No, sorry, 2014-15 we didn't qualify because we're 9 points behind Ulster. There's a maximum of 10 points to be gained, and I don't see Ulster not picking up a point anywhere. Leinster are already, they've romped the conference, so they're through. Edinburgh, they're doing a lot better than Glasgow this season, unfortunately, for me. Yeah, I think they've mathematically they've made it through to the playoffs as well now. They're 10 points clear, so they just need to pick up a point in Glasgow against Glasgow, and then they'll be through. So it's looking likely that these will be behind closed doors. Dominic Mackay, who's the Chief Operating Officer at Scottish Rugby, he wrote to the Scottish Government a couple of days ago, him and Peter Lawwell, who's the Chief Executive at Celtic, just asking about using Murrayfield and Celtic Park as test stadiums, sort of like biologically secure test stadiums, because they're the 2 biggest stadia in the country. With the 2 metre distancing, the Murrayfield capacity would be cut from 67,000 to 14,000. So we need to wait and see how that goes, because then how do you allocate tickets?
Do you think that could work then, or is that just a non-starter in your?
I think it's a non-starter. I think it's just like it's the quest for money. It's looking for the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I cannot see any Scottish sports fans being allowed back into stadia until September at the earliest. I would think even then it's not looking likely. I mean, there's a high likelihood that the All Blacks were due to play in Scotland and Britain. Actually, I think they were meant to play England and Wales as well this autumn. Doesn't look like they're going to be travelling. So obviously this is having a massive financial impact, which is why.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. The money side of things. How's that impacted on rugby union?
It's going to have a huge impact. Martin Phillips, the Welsh rugby chief exec, he said he reckoned that the extended lockdown, if the autumn internationals are cancelled, it's going to cost up to £50 million. And Scottish Rugby's turnover, the last time figures were released, it was the whole turnover for the year was about 65 million. So that's if Scotland are going to lose about the same amount as Wales, that's a huge amount. We're talking over 3/4 of cash there. So it's a big issue, but there has been some private investment from CVC, although CVC have got a bit of a patchy record with regards to their investments.
Including in motorsport.
Yeah.
But we've seen, Richard, haven't we? The crowd's already in rugby league in Australia and rugby union in particular.
Yeah, New Zealand.
Yeah.
Well, they've dealt with things brilliantly, haven't they? I know we said before they've got the advantage of being smaller countries in terms of population, but certainly New Zealand have dealt with the current pandemic brilliantly. But we seem to be the only people who be bringing COVID into the country, don't we? But they've been able to get back to their normal much quicker than we have, without any worries about money and more about the health of the people, which is probably where we should be thinking more than about how we can make some money watching football, rugby, or cricket, or whatever's going on. You imagine, I mean, even as someone who's not a big fan of rugby union, the All Blacks is a brand which people who are not fans of rugby will go and pay attention to, whether it's buying tickets or watching on TV. So that would be obviously a huge loss to the international unions were that torn not to go ahead later this year. So it's that difficult balancing act, and it's difficult for everyone in every walk of life, in every industry, about public health and the economy. And behind closed doors games, they don't work, do they? But it's about getting product on TV at the end of the day, and that's what all sports are trying to do, sadly.
Yeah, and John, just give us an outline about the motorsport scene as well. Obviously, empty stadia. F1 is coming back. It should have been Le Mans last week, shouldn't it? And just give us an outline for those that don't know about the motorsport.
Well, talking about Australia, they're a perfect place to start, because we should have had the Australian Grand Prix to kick things off. We had a Porsche Carrera Cup race there and nothing else. Still no interstate travel allowed in Australia for people. So, you know, even there, they're still struggling with getting their heads around this. I think motorsport is one of the sporting events that suffer slightly less by not having a crowd there. If you're sitting in the grandstand waiting for the start of the Le Mans 24 hours, waiting for the start of the British Grand Prix, then clearly there's an atmosphere thing there and there's an emotional thing there. But does it add to the spectacle, particularly the television spectacle? And I would say of all the sports that we talk about, probably anything other than Ryder Cup golf and motorsport, the crowd is not such an integral part of what's going on. I see the sense in it, but it comes back to what we've said all the way along. This is Liberty, this is Formula One management trying to desperately get to those 15 races for the television contract. They've announced 8, all of which are in Europe. The FIA, the governing body of all motorsport, have been very sensible, very pragmatic, sometimes 2 words you wouldn't put together with the FIA, but I'll give them credit this time. They have waived what's called the continents rule, where you've got to go to 4 different continents around the world to make it a world championship. That's been waived for Formula One and for all of their other world championships for the foreseeable future. Indeed, the World Motorsport Council only met last Friday, completely digitally for the first time ever, and put together some very clever tweaks and twists to the sporting regulations to take into account the COVID precautions that have to be done. We did have motor racing last weekend in Portimao in Portugal on the Algarve with an international endurance event, small number of cars, only just under 20 cars, but with social distancing in the pits, and indeed teams were getting warned and penalised for getting close to breaching the new regulations. It's doable. Again, I think you've got to ask about the motivation. It comes back. My wife always says, follow the money, and it will come back to the money. Do we need to have Formula One this year? No, we don't. Not in terms of as a sporting spectacle, but it's a business, as all sport is, and I understand the need to get it going. Will it suffer from not having fans at the first 2 races in Austria from July the 4th onwards? Probably not. Probably not that much. How the press are going to cover it, how it's going to be perceived. The UK broadcaster Sky are talking about taking their commentators there. I think that's folly. I really do. I don't think there's any need for them to do that. We've been covering events remotely for years, and the technology and the infrastructure exists. All the big American races that have happened so far in NASCAR, they've been covered, even in the real world, they've been covered remotely as they're starting to get back. But it's coming back. There's 8 races, 2 of which will be at Silverstone provisionally. Still waiting for the confirmation of the waiver on that. And we might get, look, I'm a glass half full type of person. We might get some great venues coming back. They're talking about Mugello in Italy, which is a really fabulous Italian uphill downhill circuit with 1 road in and 1 road out. It would never work if you had fans there. They're talking about Mugello coming into the Formula One calendar. That would be fantastic. They're talking about Portimao, which I talked about earlier on, built as a test venue. 2008, 2009, they had some testing there, and then the testing was banned. So there's a chance of 2 races in Portimao in October, and that's again a very uncharacteristic in the modern era Formula One circuit, with big big changes in the geography and the topography of the circuit, and it's new. It'll be exciting because the teams won't know it. IndyCar, for example, had a run recently where they had a very short practice straight into qualifying and then raced on the same day. So none of this hours and hours of setting things up, and so the cream always rises to the top. It was a much more level playing field. The best drivers, the best teams will still get on, but I like the uncertainty of that. But Formula One will be back, and possibly in the UK as well.
Yeah, we hope so. I just wanted, if you briefly, John, as well, the boom of the virtual racing. It's been amazing for that, hasn't it, in the lockdown?
Well, we did a race over the weekend, which was the virtual 24 hours of Le Mans on iRacing, which is acknowledged as the granddaddy platform of international simulated racing. And there was 2,420 teams entered. That's nearly 10,000 drivers, not all on the same track at the same time. We were looking at the top 55, the top split, as it's called. And you are getting big names in those events. IMSA in the States did a Pro Series that we were involved with 50 odd real world drivers in there. What you have to remember is sim racing isn't new. It hasn't just popped up in the last 12 weeks or so. These big events have been going for years. The iRacing 24 hours powered by VCO at the weekend that we were involved with, that's its 6th year. But the real litmus test for me, John, to be honest, is last year, that event, their Blue Ribbon event of the iRacing series, that attracted about 1,000 drivers and 1,000 teams rather, and about 3,700 drivers. So more than double this year. The interest in simulated racing, particularly where you can race against real people in real time, has exploded, and that's in the real world, what we call full metal drivers, also virtual drivers. Mixed together tends to be the best. So endurance racing, where you have a couple of guys from the real world, a couple of sim racing stars who can wipe the floor with pretty much any of the real world drivers, however high up the ladder they are, that seems to work the best. It's been great, and I don't think that's going away. We're going to continue to cover these series right through the rest of their normal season, which would have already been happening this year, and that'll go right through till November, despite the fact that we've got, as I say, some full metal racing coming on stream now.
Yeah, it's been amazing, the virtual stuff. Just wanted a couple of minutes left of the programme. It's flown by as always. Just wanted to come back to you, Iain, about, we touched on the Pro 14. Just what about the Six Nations? Obviously, that's still a bit of a mess, isn't it, at the minute? It still needs to finish this season, and then looking World Rugby, we're looking at restructuring maybe the calendar, things like that.
Yeah, well, they always talk about restructuring the calendar to make it a more global calendar. Mark Dodson, the chief executive at Scottish Rugby, he's also sort of he's thinking this could be a good time for change, because there was a lot of postponed club matches. You know, the sort of top amateur tier, there was a lot of postponed matches this winter. You know, obviously the weather in Scotland is it's likely to happen, but you know, I think summer rugby would probably be, I think it would be a winner with the fans. A lot of the players don't seem too chuffed with it, but the fans would certainly appreciate it. With regards to Six Nations, obviously the Scotland-Wales match got cancelled at the last minute, and I've already said Wales are standing to lose about £50 million, they're saying. So there is a thought that if the Southern Hemisphere teams aren't going to tour in the autumn, they could maybe finish those matches behind closed doors if need be in the autumn, and then go again for the Six Nations in 2021. It was a very, you know, this is one of the closer Six Nations in recent years. You know, France had been going great guns, then the wheels fell off at Murrayfield. So I think it would have been a fantastic finish. So I would like to see it get finished off, and hopefully Scotland can get a result over Wales and not finish fifth again for the first time in ages. That'd be nice.
And just finally, Richard, that's the thing, isn't it? Getting these competitions finished, which is what we've seen in rugby league in Australia. Rugby league here, not so much yet.
Summer rugby will never work. Don't try it. It's interesting though, because you move things to summer. And I don't know what the demographic breakdown of fans in Edinburgh and Glasgow is in terms of whether they watch football as well. But obviously, rugby league stuck bang in the middle of football territory. So moving to the summer gives you the opportunity for people who do go watch their local football team to watch the rugby team in the summer as well. But we're just waiting for the restart of Super League. It looks like now August. Looks like we're playing in a number of biosecure venues, which sounds fancy, as we said before. Probably Headingley and a couple of others because they have the facilities there, and they are rugby stadiums rather than being shared with football, which also helps. But it does look like August for the restart. As for below Super League, no one's got a clue on that. But we're going to be back soonish.
We'll see. We're out of time, guys. Thanks ever so much for joining us. Richard Shaw-Wright, Iain Hay, and John Hindhaugh. It's been great having you on Sport Chat today. Thanks a lot.